How many paintings do you work on at one time then?
I try to do one at a time. However, even as I say that, I often will need to let a painting rest and then come back to it because you get blind after a while,
Ah,
or I just get lost. I don't know what to do. So I just have to let it be. And sometimes if I'm working in a series, if I'm in the same color palette, it doing the next one informs what needs to happen on the one I'm stuck on. So before I begin to paint, I'm putting my little finger cuts on and my thing. I was told you wanted to see my studio a little bit. So I'm just going to rotate this a little bit. I've got the screen covering the windows to the south because otherwise they blind me when I'm painting. So can you see the computer screen where I was sitting?
Exactly. Use your desktop.
I'm in an attic. I'm in the attic of you can see the strange ceilings. I'm in the attic of my house that we finished off as a studio. And then here's a desk that I work at. Comes around. Aren't those drawers cool? Let me show you those.
Yeah, you can have your finished work in there or papers.
When my local art supply store went out of business, they sold me some of their fixtures.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So I'm going in a circle. And here's, storage racks from the same art supply store.
Yep.
And my north lighting and painting storage. Is this making anybody dizzy yet?
not yet. Keep
No.
going.
Okay, so now I'm coming back around. Have you guys ever seen one of these ladders that they sell at Richardson?
I see.
Cool.
It's a great way to have storage and right at your fingertips. There's a couple I'm thinking about working on. I've been working on them. They're in the thinking stage. And we come back to where I was.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Thank
Okay. Is that about
Oh.
right?
That's good.
Good.
Okay. Okay. Give me a second. I'm just going to do some very beginning steps on this painting, addressing not only the image, but the whole idea of working with white, because that was, and working from Ghost Ranch. So I'm going to show you that I took a whole bunch of photographs of this particular rock and the foliage that was.
They're very abstract looking considering their photographs. That's amazing.
Yes, they are.
And they look like paintings.
They do. Yeah.
I got to turn you guys up on my computer. I can't quite hear you. Okay, somebody talk to me.
Hello.
Okay. Oh, that's much better. Okay. So these are the kind of pictures I like to take. And it was just these, I don't know, is it oleander or whatever the plant is, and its shadows. But I was very enamored of that yellow crack and coloration coming through the rock.
Oh.
So in many ways, it's a very simple composition. It's about the white rock with the yellow ochre crack running through it, and the green colored leaves and their shadows. So I worked on some thumbnails
Wow.
and took some notes about underpainting colors. Because as we all know, you don't really know a composition until you draw it. I mean, I can take all the pictures in the world, but until I draw it, I don't have it kinetically inside me until I actually draw it. So what you see here on the easel, oh, and this is the photo. I did it a big 8x10. I usually like to use only 4x6 photos so that I purposely do not have too much information. I don't want to be a slave to the photograph. So by keeping it small, I have to invent when I enlarge it on the painting. But for your purposes today, I've printed up those images so that you can at least see a little bit more what I'm working from. There you go. For an underpainting, this is watercolor. I've used reds into oranges, very, soft, and then off into this pale violet, because I know that there's actually violet undertones in this photograph, in the rocks. And it's just a matter of the contrast with that yellow ochre that I'm going to be setting up. And I used a burnt sienna for the shadows and a mixture of cerulean blue and phthalo green for the leaves. And the positioning of these things you can see is pretty loose. I'm not going to be following exactly where those leaves go because I'm going to need to invent them a little bit as I go along. I know there's going to be leaves. I know there's going to be shadows. I've got some references so that I can make some beautiful, accurate forms, but exactly where they end up on the painting is going to be pretty intuitive as I go along. So one of the difficulties of working with white is that it's hard to put the darks on top of them. So it's always a challenge when I've got a lot of light in the background like this. How do I do the darks? And the answer is I just struggle. I do a little bit of back and forth of both. So I'm going to lay in a few of the dark shadow leaves and a few reminders of the greens I'm going to use for the leaves. But then mostly I'm going to spend my time in this next 20 minutes or so working on the backdrop, on the background rock, so you get to see how that works. I will then have to reassert some of these leaf forms on top of the light, and I may have to scrape off a little pastel. I might even have to wet the surface with a brush and blot off the pastel so I'm back to my watercolor. Does that make sense to people?
Yes.
Okay. So let's begin with, I was asked about my favorite darks. This is a good time. Let me get my notes. Because there are a few darks I don't think I could paint without. And one of them is the Terry Ludwig eggplant, the V100. Do we all agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a fabulous one. There are also several Senneliers, particularly in the greens and blues, that I find fabulous. There's two blackish greens that I use all the time, 177 and 179. And I'm thinking I'm going to have to talk to Pierre and have him start paying me for every one of those that they sell, because I tell everybody about those two greens. in their Prussian blue, the Sennelier Prussian blue 463. That is the darkest Prussian blue that I have found, and I use it. In fact, I think I'll use it now on my shadows. There's a great American dark brown called 810 that I am very enamored of. And at the same time that I talk about the darks, I would say my favorite white that goes on top of everything the best and is the brightest white for me is the Schminky white.
Yeah.
Then again, I live in Wisconsin, which is where Jack Richardson is. How lovely for me. And years ago, when he was developing his own pastel brands, he was doing some experimentation. And I was able to purchase
Oh,
a couple of these.
wow.
This is their warm white. This used to be that big. This is their pure white. And this one, I have a lot of fun with this guy. And they were only doing it in the warm white, the white, and the black. But I begged them to make some other ones like that because they're fabulous. Okay. So I'm going to find my dark Prussian blue. And the reason I'm putting these in, even though I'm not being real precise about it, is I want to see the value. I want to see how dark it's going to go. And I want to start developing all my other values in relationship to it. So I want to see for myself how dark these are going to be. So I'm just making some notes. And I like it's probably very hard. Can you guys even see the color on this?
I hope we can. I think I can.
Yeah.
And I hope
Okay.
others can.
Well, my laptop doesn't have the greatest rendering, and so I'm afraid it's very disappointing.
It looks,
They're
it
never
looks,
intense. The colors aren't on a screen, but we can see definitely they're a very deep color in that Prussian.
yes, yes.
Okay, you can see at least that it's very deep.
And
Now
the violets.
I'm taking this Sennelier 179, I think it is, and I'm going to do the same. Because it's greener, and I want to remind myself that I don't know yet how cool or warm the shadows have to be. That's what I'm telling myself. So I'm trying a green, I'm trying a blue. I'm also going to go to my dark brown just to see if they're going to end up being brown. I don't know. So it'll be closer to the brown that's on there now. Okay, now I'm going to make a few notes about the leaf colors that are going to be in the end. And in the photographs, one of the things I liked about the imagery is that some of the leaves are very light and cool, and others are very dark. And I know that I can make some warmer and some cooler. So I'm going to get to play with all different greens, which is something I like to do. So I'm going to begin with I'm going to begin with something cooler. as soon as I find what I want. There we go. This is quite a blue-green. So again, these are notations to remind me of what I'm going to be working against. So now I'm going to start having some fun with the white rock. And I'm going to begin with a color very similar to the underpainting. It's a very pale violet, and this is a large art spectrum. Any of you guys use any of the large art spectrums? Some of them are quite good. Okay, so okay, I want you to see that up close. Is it possible to see what that just did there?
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay, so what I'm already establishing is I'm establishing some of the texture on the rock.
Right.
The color is similar to the red violet that's on there. It's a little higher value, but just a little, so it's quite close. So I'm just going to scumble this in as a base color to get me in the direction of where I want the stone to go.
What is the surface that you're working on?
I am working on a 4-ply museum board, which is the cotton rag 4-ply board that has been treated with 2 coats of thinned golden ground for pastel.
Okay,
Got that?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as I do this, I'm not doing it evenly. I am purposely trying to be somewhat random and somewhat aligned with the various things that I'm seeing in the photograph. So for instance, right along here, you see how I've drawn quite an edge just by using this side of the pastel. Now, I didn't draw it like a line. And on this side, so you can see I'm already establishing some crack shapes in the rock by where I put this. Okay, do you see how that works? Let me get up closer on that one again. I'm starting to define that rosy edge by putting in this lighter pale violet. Now that will get refined further when I go to more of the yellow ochre, the local color. Now, I may not, one thing I would mention is, if this isn't the perfect color, it's okay. If it's not the perfect value at this stage of thing, it's okay. What is important is that I treat the whole rock surface with some of the same of it. So that, let's say I started it over here and went, oh, I don't like that. That spot would always stand out. So I would still put some of it around. So if I end up covering it, it doesn't look like a funny mistake spot. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you kind of have made a mistake, just go with it because it's early enough that you can alter that. So one of the things going through my mind as I do this is recognizing that at some point I'm going to have to decide how loose and impressionistic am I going to be about the positioning of these leaves and how specific and literal am I going to be? Because right now, when I put this pale violet on, there are places where I'm covering up my underpainting for the leaves. And I may have to reassert, or maybe I will leave it, you know, with a soft edge, with an indeterminateness, and just make really accurate forms in the focal area. Because that's another way that you can keep your work from being too fussy or too literal is make your beautiful, accurate forms and your beautiful drawing in certain areas and let the rest be a little more vague. Okay. I'm going to follow that pale violet with another one that is warmer. It's pinker, because there are certain areas where I'm going to want to have that pinkiness showing up against this. And, okay, I'm going to try to help you see this, but it is rather subtle. I'm sorry.
It does show up.
You can see that where I put that rosy color on the watercolor up here, it looks darker. Where I put it here on top of the paler, cooler violet, it has just kind of melded together into a new color. So this is one of the ways that I keep my whites or any of my tones interesting, is that I play with subtle variations. What I'm seeing is the warmth of this is going to be good because this is basically a warm image. It's a hot desert setting. So the warmth of this I'm very happy with. It'll work well against those yellow ochres. Okay. Let's move in. I'm jumping ahead. If I were doing this more slowly, I would stay with some other subtle things, but I'm going to go right to this interesting part and move into the yellow ochres. And I will treat myself to my Terry Lidwig yellow box. And what will I start with? Let's try this. I'm going to use this very, very light yellow, just a little, not much, because it's too light, but I think it's going to transition from the purple to the yellow ochre. And there are spots of it. Which are going to be useful to me.
Kind of like sunlight spots from on the rock.
Yes. And I'm even going to drag it out here just a little bit. I'm barely touching the board. Just barely. There's more of it here. That's the other thing. I try not to do it too evenly. If there's, if it's a transition from the violet to the ochre, I don't want it to be the same all the way. And if this side has a little more, then there'll be less over here. I try not to do it too evenly so that there is the differentiation even within the subtleties. So down here, I'm going to go a little more with the yellow. People often ask me how I can work from photographs and see this many colors or things and not, well, the whole not plein air is a whole other discussion that I don't want to get into, or I can't right now. But the way I try to describe it is when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, you know how you set your eye to find just what you're looking for. You're looking for a piece with 2 outies and a green stripe on it. Okay? And you're looking at all the pieces, but you're like laser focused. 2 outies with a green stripe, 2 outies with a green stripe. And then sooner or later you find it.
Yes.
I think that when I'm looking at the photograph and I have a color in my hand, I think I'm doing the same thing. So I've identified this pale, almost cool green, yellow, and I'm looking at this photograph only for that color. And anywhere I see any hint or tone of it, I put it down. When I switch colors, let's say to we're going to go way over to the darker yellow ochre now because we're just about, I think we're about at the end of our time. I'm only looking for that color now on my photo. So when I drag this little guy along here, I'm only looking for him, for that color. And you can see I kind of messed up on the shape here. It's important that this white is going to come back in there. So before I forget, I want to reassert that space between there, because I think that's really important. So this is the beginning of refining my form as I add each layer of color. Now, even as I'm putting this one on, I'm not putting it on very, very heavily yet. I'm still letting the red underpainting show through. So I'm still not committed, shall we say. Because that was one of the last questions I was going to try to address, is the relationship between the pastel and the watercolor. I would say that for me, it's an ongoing relationship and an ongoing understanding of the relationship. When I first started it, it was very pragmatic. I wanted to get colors down to work the pastel on. And I schlepped my watercolor on without any great skill. It was just a way of not filling the tooth and getting a color down to work on. The longer I work with it, the more I realize the watercolor has something to say as well. And I am dedicating myself to encouraging that conversation and allowing the watercolor to have its say. So I'm going to show you one of the pieces I'm working on that's sitting here. Okay. Now I will point out to you that the bright gold you're looking at is almost all watercolor underpainting.
Oh,
There is a little bit of pastel in spots, but the pale blue grays are the pastel and the violet. Down here on the lower part, the watercolor is a deep magenta that I have put various analogous tones of pastel on. But my goal with the painting is to be very non-literal, more abstract, and leave more of the watercolor to have that conversation. So if you ever see that painting again, it's not going to look like that, but I don't know what it's going to look like. That's not one I would show as a teaching example, because I am flying, by the seat of my pants, and I wouldn't know what to say. I'm just, figuring it out as I go along.
Yeah,
So
fun with it.
Pardon?
You're just having fun with it.
Well, it isn't fun.
See where it leads you.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doing stuff where I know a little more of what I'm doing is much more fun. When I don't know what I'm doing, I find it
a little bit scary.
I'll come down for supper and tell my husband, well, I don't know what I did. So I find it a little harder, but I'm trying to grow and develop. So if there's any more questions, I would be happy to entertain them.
Not a question, Colette, but I want to make a comment. I painted in Door County for years.
Who's talking?
This is Bud Edmondson.
oh,
Oh, hi, Bud. Okay.
Yeah, when I lived in Chicago, we went up to Door County all the time to paint, and I even showed in a gallery up there for years. So I loved your comments about Door County, but I love the boats and the fences instead of the rocks.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Bud.
I just wanted to mention that Colette will be teaching at IAPS.
Yep.
Yes, and so to look for her class or demo, and so you can see her in person.
And you can register for her class in January when they come out with the.
That's right, January 4th. They open the registration for the classes. Yep.
Very important.
Looking forward.
Got to register early.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You've been wonderful. You got me going on one of my pastels that I've wanted to do from New Mexico again, so thank you. I'm gonna, you know what I will do is, Letty, I will, when I do a demo for people, I always promise that if they want, I will send the finished painting sometime.
Yes, please,
It
please.
may
do
take a
that.
while. It may take a
Well,
while.
That's okay. We're still in
You're
the
still
zone.
there. Because sometimes I can finish it in a few weeks or a week or two or whenever, but I don't do the photography until I have a bunch. Because I have to set up my studio differently to take photos. So I wait until I've got a bunch and then I do the photo shoot.
Sure.
Oh, well, we do thank you tremendously for this wonderful, wonderful answering all our questions. And then some. Thank you.
Well, and I love you guys and I love New Mexico. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all in June.